Good evening and welcome to News Review. The Crown's opening statement was heard at the trial of the Marache brothers. It's taken over 3 years for this high-profile case to reach the Supreme Court. Benjamin, Solomon and Isaac Marache, together with Leanne Turnbull, face 2 charges of conspiracy to defraud. A total of around £27 million is still owed to the firm's clients. The trial is expected to take up to 5 months.
By the time Marache & Co. collapsed in February 2010, the firm owed a total of around £40 million to banks, clients, employees and other firms it traded with. Now, 3.5 years later, they stand on trial, facing charges of conspiring to defraud clients of Marache & Co. and/or trusts connected to these clients in 2004, and also with conspiring to defraud Juska Bank in 2009. Acting for the Crown, Mr. John McGuinness QC said the biggest losers in the whole matter were the clients, who are still owed around £27 million. According to the prosecution, clients' money was transferred from bank account to bank account until it was eventually lost, with clients' money also being used for the running of the firm, which was falling down the slippery slope of liquidation. By the time the Marache brothers were declared bankrupt in 2010, millions of pounds were missing. Mr. McGuinness pointed out that money doesn't just disappear into thin air, and stealing on a grand scale wasn't the work of one person alone. Numerous clients will appear as witnesses during the trial, including some of the Marache's biggest high-net-worth clients, who will also be giving evidence.
It was another busy week at the Dr. Hiraldi Home inquiry. It started with the chairman of the inquiry urging people not to comment on the proceedings in any public forum. This week we heard from the then acting CEO of the Social Services Agency, who denied that he was ever asked to cover up the allegations of abuse at the home. Also, Chief Minister at the time, Sir Peter Caruana, said it was an extraordinary suggestion that he attempted to obstruct the investigation.
Sir Peter spoke of his role as Chief Minister at the time of former Dr. Hiraldi Home Manager Joana Hernandez's Industrial Tribunal for unfair dismissal, saying he was not involved closely throughout, but was consulted on a number of occasions. Answering questions by lead inquiry counsel Robert Engelhardt QC, Sir Peter responded to allegations heard last week by the former leader of the opposition, Joe Bossano, who represented Mrs. Hernandez at the tribunal. When asked if it was true he'd masterminded a strategy to delay and block the tribunal proceedings so that the witness statements would, as Mr. Bossano had said, never see the light of day, Sir Peter said that if this had been the case, his government could have simply conceded the unfair dismissal claim at any time to avoid publicity. Asked by Mrs. Hernandez's lawyer, David Enright, if he had taken the case personally, Sir Peter said no, but added that he felt the then opposition was milking it mercilessly and unfairly for political reasons. When it was put to him by Mr. Enright that his government had handled the situation very badly, Sir Peter said his personal view was that it was handled impeccably. Also giving evidence today were former consecutive ministers for social services, Yvette Del Agua and Jaime Neto. Mrs. Del Agua said she was satisfied that the allegations of abuse she was presented with before the tribunal were all investigated, going on to add that the unfavourable publicity around the home, generated in Gibraltar and Spain as a result, led to a dreadful time for the staff, the residents and everybody else. The inquiry continues over tomorrow and next week, with more evidence still to be heard.
The government said there was much to be welcomed in the decision this week by the European Commission to open a formal state aid investigation into aspects of Gibraltar's Income Tax Act. The investigation concerns 2 aspects of the ROC's corporate tax regime, and Number 6 says it's confident that it can take legislative action swiftly in order to address the issues that appear to concern the Commission. It's been engaged with the European Commission over the last year and has already convened a meeting to consult it on the matter.
The government welcomes that the Commission is not questioning a territorial system of taxation, but most importantly welcomes that for the first time it's categorically rejected Spain's argument that the ROC's corporate tax regime is regionally selective. This, says the Chief Minister, is very good news for Gibraltar. Following the introduction of legislation locally, the Commission's investigation on interest merely focuses on the period between the 1st of January 2011 and the 1st of July this year. The government believes it may be required to make legislative changes in relation to the non-taxation of royalties, although it's of the view that this does not fall foul of EU state aid rules. It will, however, consider all available options in order to deliver legal certainty, including, if necessary and appropriate, amending the Income Tax Act 2010. It will make a further announcement on the issue once it's consulted the industry and made relevant representations to the Commission.
Also this week, the Gibraltar government has bought back the east side plot of land from developers for £28 million. The developers originally made payments of up to £32 million for the land. The government says it will now consider a number of projects for the area.
The history of the East Side project now stretches back over 10 years. It was in 2003 that preferred bidder status was granted to Chelsfield International and Multiplex Construction. The then Chief Minister, Peter Caruana, said it was likely that a deal would be signed by 2004 and then construction would take around 10 years. But it wasn't until 2007 that Multiplex and Aldersgate Investments submitted outline planning permission to the Development and Planning Commission for Sovereign Bay. The project at the time consisted of a cruise liner berth and terminal, a five-star hotel, a home ownership project and a marina. Considerable land reclamation has been carried out, but construction never went ahead. In its 2011 election manifesto, the GSLP Liberals vowed to redevelop the area for housing, tourism and a small boat marina. Now the government has announced that following discussions with developers, it's paid £28 million to buy back the east side, in furtherance of the commitment to unblock development of that land. It says this will now form part of the government's land bank for a series of projects which are currently under discussion.
Commonwealth Park is expected to be complete and accessible to the public in 6 months' time. However, in the first post-summer parliamentary question time, the Chief Minister told the opposition that an estimate of costs is not available to give. An announcement on the tender award for the replacement to the bus fleet, as well as a draft plan for the Upper Rock management, are expected in December.
Fabian Picardo told Parliament that as guardians of the public purse, the government felt it was actually more important not to reveal estimates on Commonwealth Park at this stage. This was in response to opposition member Selwyn Figueres, who said it was astounding that the government should not want to submit that estimate to public scrutiny. Mr. Picardo said the cost of every tulip and tree would be presented for scrutiny once the project was finished. And the opposition could keep asking the same question every month, they would be getting the same answer. 5 tender applicants for the replacement of the bus fleet have already sent vehicles to Gibraltar, and those vehicles are being tested on our roads. The tender board is considering these applications, and an announcement is expected in December, with the new buses in operation not more than 12 months after that. Asked about stopgap measures, Minister Neil Costa said there were contractual obligations with local companies to replace any vehicles being repaired. The government is considering all options when looking at the future of GB bikes, following contractual problems with the supplier which have gone before the Supreme Court. Mr. Costa said he'd been hopeful of a resolution, but negotiations had reached an impasse and litigation was inevitable. Mr. Figueres said he took this to mean that the option of another urban bike scheme in the future to replace the current one hadn't been discarded. And the Environment Minister, John Cortes, said a draft of the Upper Rock Management Plan will be discussed with stakeholders as from December. These include Upper Rock Management, environmental groups and tour operators.
A bill presented to protect Gibraltar's rights to its territorial waters under UK law has unanimously progressed through to its second reading. It was presented by MP David Morris, who said Gibraltarians would take pride in the amount of support they have in the House of Commons.
David Morris pledged his intention to introduce the Maritime Borders Bill to the Chief Minister when he visited the Rock on the 10th of September.
I recently went out to Gibraltar, and obviously I've been reading in the press about the problems with the Spanish border. I'm from a nautical family, and it came to my attention that the Spanish were flouting the territorial waters of Gibraltar. You know, Gibraltarians are Gibraltarians. They're not part of Spain, but it's up to Gibraltar to have their say on what they should have as their territorial waters and not have them in dispute.
The bill's designed to define and enshrine British overseas territorial waters under UK law.
But with Gibraltar having a modern status as it has now, as more of a financial powerhouse, and obviously it still has nautical connections, especially with the Royal Navy. I spoke to the First Minister, and the First Minister thinks it would be more appropriate if there was a 3-mile limit. It's interesting that there has been a Spanish boat within the past few days, within 2 nautical miles of Gibraltar's waters, which, as I'm saying, you know, we should have a bill in Parliament now to start to enforce what is actual territorial rights for Gibraltar.
The MP for Morecambe and Lonsdale in Lancashire is set to do this under the 10-minute rule. The rule's a procedure under parliamentary law which allows members to introduce a private member's bill in addition to the 20 bills normally allowed every session. Members have to file their application on a first-come, first-served basis 3 weeks before the parliamentary sitting. Introducing a private member's bill by any other means is so difficult, it's been known for MPs to sleep outside the application office to guarantee their slot via the 10-minute rule. Regardless of whether or not Mr Morris needs to go that far to move his bill, he's already endeared himself to many. Gibraltarians took to Twitter last night to thank the MP, while Baron Ahmad of Wimbledon, a Conservative member of the House of Lords, tweeted, "Need to protect Gibraltar, right behind you, David Morris."
It is totally cross-party. The people who are my other colleagues who are signing this bill range from Ian Paisley to Jim Dobbin in the Labour Party, Angus MacNeil from Scotland, who's a Scottish nationalist. As you can see, it's all across parties. We all agree that Gibraltar should have its rights to have its own territorial waters, not only defined but enforced.
In a statement, Mr Morris himself said he wants there to be no doubt where Gibraltar's territorial waters are located geographically. It follows an incursion on Friday in which a Spanish Navy ship asserted it was in Spanish waters.
You know, I've heard reports of a jet skier being chased more or less into the harbour of Gibraltar, being shot at by Spanish police with rubber bullets. Now, we have to stop this nonsense from occurring. We're having problems on the borders, on the terrestrial borders, and now having problems in the maritime waters. You know, Spain should enhance and hold out the hand of friendship to Gibraltar because it is a financial powerhouse in the area, and it could act as a Hong Kong to Spain, as Hong Kong acted to China. Gibraltar could act as that to Spain. I think that it's no time that we start to be grown up and have a sensible discussion about whose waters are what and whose boundaries are whose, and push a bill through Parliament that enforces that's agreeable on all sides.
The bill is scheduled to go before the House of Commons on Wednesday afternoon.
The Gibraltar Maritime Protection Bill calls for defined boundaries of 3 nautical miles, but does not mean the ROC cannot claim 12 miles in the future should this be deemed appropriate. The bill will receive its second reading on Friday the 28th of February next year. And we'll be back with more of this week's news after the break.